I don't know if I can take it anymore.
When you are depressed, you don't want to get
It
out of
seems
it.
so hard today.
You don't want to be bothered with anyone.
I don't have any
But
motivation.
overcoming depression is going to require that you get up and engage with life again.
All I want to do is sleep.
When you are feeling down, the worst thing you can do
The last thing
is
I want to do is
isolate
hang out
yourself,
with my friends.
because isolation actually intensifies sadness.
I don't think this will ever
So
go
I
away.
recommend finding a distraction that will shift your energy.
I wish somebody would just save me from this mental hell. Welcome to the Mental Health Podcast. I have Eric McCoy here with me today with the High While Clean. He is an author, a podcaster, and so much more. Thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
But before we started hitting the record button, you were talking about something, and I said, I want to get this recorded. It's extremely important to me for people to understand this. So we'll talk about your journey, but tell me about your relapse in 2013.
Yeah, so I had 11 years clean and sober. During those 11 years, I'd been a counselor, program director, executive director, clinical director. I owned a program, during those 11-year, period. And I made some poor choices, obviously, that led me to ultimately make the decision to relapse, which was obviously a horrible, I was kind of saying in the beginning, it was a horrible choice, but in the same side, it was a fantastic experience because I got to really, truly see the power behind addiction. I talk about this in my book, in Pain, Failure, and Misery Are the Stepping Stones to Success. I talk about how it was like literally Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I went from, having integrity. I'd give you the shirt off my back. I'd do anything for you. I'd help you in any way that you needed. And then I took that hit off that pipe, and I would rob from you. I'd steal from you, and it wouldn't matter.
Let me ask you, because somebody myself who went through the AA program, and the one thing that in my sobriety that I have learned is, for me, I know I cannot take a single sip of alcohol, because at that point, for me, I know that would be the end of it. Like it would not stop with just one sip. And, they always say, like, people try to control the addiction, right?
Yeah.
I can just have one drink. And I know I cannot just have one drink. What made you take that hit off the pipe?
So it was kind of an interesting story behind it, but my girlfriend at the time, she's not my wife, but my girlfriend at the time, we had, I'd owned a program. I left, I basically sold my shares of the program. I had a problem with my business partner. I went to work for somebody else, and I took a huge pay cut, and I was, sort of the financial aspect of it. My girlfriend and I decided that we had an extra room, and we were going to rent a room to somebody who she had helped out when this guy was a kid, but also knew that this person had a prior meth issue. And I sat down with him before we actually made the full decision to do it. And I told him, I said, you know what I do? I said, if I think you're using, I'm going to search your stuff. If I find it, I'm going to throw you out. Said it a little more explicit than that, I think, but and so after, I don't know, maybe a couple of months or so, I started seeing all the signs in the world, and he sort of disappeared. And so I went into his room, and I found 4 glass pipes. I smashed 3 of them, and I kept one to basically say, okay, hey, you know what? When he shows up, look, this is what I found, get your stuff.
Do you
get out of here.
think that subconsciously you kept it because you wanted maybe an opportunity to use it?
No, I don't think so, because I really had no interest in it.
Okay.
My consequences from January 3rd, 2002 was when I started that 11 years.
Right.
And so I got arrested for the 4th time in 6 months. I was looking at 15 years in prison. I mean, it was a horrible, scenario. I was sick of the lifestyle. I wanted nothing to do with it. and I felt I was stable. I mean, this is the crazy part, and I tell clients or people that I work with, make sure that you keep the stuff as far away from you as you can,
Yeah.
because, at some point in time, something may happen. So I put it away in my drawer and I forgot about it. And he didn't show up for, at all. And I think, maybe a week, 2 weeks had passed, and I had a dream, and that's where it started for me. I had this dream where I took a hit off a meth pipe. I was an IV user, but that was, I kind of always, even after I'd relapsed, that was one of the rules I set. Okay, don't slam it, but so I had this dream that I'd taken this hit, and it was so vivid. I woke up, I could taste it, I could
Mhm.
feel it, everything about it. Um, and that's when the cravings were so intense, so intense. I didn't say anything to my girlfriend. Um, and so she left for work, and then all of a sudden that pipe popped in my head, and all I could think about was that pipe. And the crazy part, and this is sort of what I call, it was the battle between Beelzebub and benefactor, the evil one and the kindly helper. And it was like in my head, I literally battled it. I remember grabbing the pipe. I think I was kind of pacing back and forth before taking the hit, saying, "Oh, come on, you can just take one hit." And I'm
Mhm.
going,
It's
"No
that
way,
low
that's
split, that
crazy.
one.
There's no way
Yeah.
you can do that, Yeah, come on, just a little, not a big deal." And I, in my head, just, you know, kept battling that. I literally, it was crazy. Like, I didn't want to take it, but I wanted to take the hit. It was so, that ambivalence was really there. And I obviously decided to take the hit. And I knew, I literally took the hit and I knew I was screwed.
Yeah.
Um, and everything, everything that mattered no longer mattered anymore.
And do you feel like, well, one, do you feel like if that guy hadn't come and lived in your house, that this would have happened at some point in the future?
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. Um, it's because it's crazy. I mean, I was very stable in my recovery. And I don't know. It's kind of what we call, like, sort of that insanity behind
Right.
addiction.
Yep.
How do you go, from the stability and everything that I was at that
Right.
point in time, to making a decision that I knew
Yep.
was the dumbest thing in the world.
It's that
You know?
insanity, like you said. It's the control, right? I can control myself.
Yeah.
I can control myself. And there is no control. That's
No.
addiction.
Yeah.
That's
And
addiction.
and that was the insane part, was like, I was trying to convince myself, and I knew there wasn't, but then I was like, yeah, but there is. And I knew there was. I mean, it was just, I don't know. I just, and then, everything was just on. I mean, it's my addiction, especially when it comes to meth. And I'm one of those people that I can't do anything. I can't drink. I can't smoke weed. Because I've tried all that before
Yeah.
too.
And you just
Uh,
have an addictive personality.
Everything.
Yeah.
If it
Me too.
if it gives me
Yeah.
that pleasure, highness, then that's what I want. But yeah, I don't play well with it, or it doesn't play well with me. What do you want to say?
So you had your wife was your girlfriend at the time.
Yep.
Because I know an addicted personality, and when you're in that space, one of the things reason why I stopped drinking, because one night I was a complete and total asshole to my husband, that I knew I couldn't do that to him. But so she put up with you. What happened?
Well, so I sort of manipulated her a lot. And then she ended up doing it.
Oh no.
But she has she doesn't have that addictive
Right.
nature that I have,
Right.
and it literally almost destroyed our relationship, because once I got heavily into it, I was gone. I mean, I would leave for days, um, run around all hours of the night. I become the epitome of your squeaking criminal, I guess you could say. um, everything. And that's the crazy part. Like everything becomes, I've got to make sure I've got money. I've got to make sure I've got more. I can't hold a job because
Right.
my head's just, um, and and then I'm breaking into houses, committing residential burglaries. I got heavily into, the credit card check fraud, so extensive to where I would go get like the credit card punchers. I'd make my own cards. I'd, you know, break into houses. I had a reader writer. I'd just scan the number on it. And then, it was a whole setup thing that I'd always get into this stuff. Mastering, making driver's license. Um, and the amazing part was that this relapse was the only time I ever got clean and sober without having to get arrested.
So tell me what happened. What was the turning point that finally led you to commit to your sobriety and pursue your career as you are now?
I needed to get a good kick in the head.
Okay.
And it's the irony behind it was I literally did too. I actually got jumped. I was, and again, it's crazy because everything about that lifestyle I hated.
Right.
I didn't want to do it anymore, but it was like the compulsion just, it wouldn't leave me. I couldn't get rid of that. And so everything like so anyways, I'm battling that. And I ended up getting jumped. These three guys, who I ended up knowing and knew, they jumped me. It started in a hotel. And next thing I know, I'm like kind of coming to in the hallway. They're taking off with all my stuff. They took like, I don't know, like $1,000 of cash I had. They took like my laptop, all the things, I was doing. And so my dope and everything. And so that financially was a big, obviously hurt. But I needed that. And that wasn't even the final thing, but it was the first step towards that direction. Cause even after that, I'm thinking like, okay, I got to get more. I got to figure out what am I going to do, and then my girlfriend, who again now is my wife, she was a big, she wasn't obviously running around like I was doing. She, stayed at the house. She slept every night, she ate.
She could stop it. She could stop it. Right.
Yeah.
There's just some people that don't seem to understand that when you have an addiction, you can't stop it. It literally rules your life. And I don't think that that's well understood.
Exactly. And that's why the stigma is so powerful out there and people hate, substance abusers.
Right.
I mean, in their minds, like we're horrible people. And that's the thing that sort of kills me is that, and all the people that I work with, it's like if we look at behaviors and we look at the things that we do while we're on it, you are,
right.
But that's not who we are. And that's like the thing is that, when I see people get clean and sober and they become who they are.
Right.
They resort back, they remove those masks, they remove all that crap, and they become the person that they are. They're great people.
Do you see an underlining trend in people that kind of like, okay, this person is a substance user because they are maybe more empathetic and they feel more? Or like, do you see like something that is common in between all of us? Because I know when I was in the AA program, I felt like the people were amazing people, but I also felt like they took on other people's responsibilities and pain a lot. And they were using the alcohol or drugs. Some people were doing drugs too, to numb all that.
Oh yeah. I honestly, I think we are more sensitive than a lot of people out there for whatever reason, the way we handled things in life, the study on dependency, like why do people, that question, like why do people become addicts versus why other people can or have that ability to stop. One of the big theories is that there is some pleasure deficiency, which could be a mental thing, so if we have a pleasure deficiency or we're not able to find pleasure or enjoyment in normal everyday activities, maybe we don't handle, I think part of it, like we don't handle stress well, maybe.
Right. You just want to get away.
Yeah, we're poor at anger management. We just want to use to numb ourselves. And I think that part of that stuff really does affect our ability to experience pleasure,
Yeah.
and so then we use a substance and we're like, and meth is just by far, the I remember when I started meth, it was very different than today. It was horrible. So, or at least when I relapsed.
What do you
And
mean by that?
so back when I started that was back when we called it crank. It was horrible looking stuff. It smelled absolutely nasty. It was made with was called P2P, which is called propyl propylethylene, which is basically an industrial cleanser, which is sounds horrible, right?
Right.
But it was the highness that it gave you was something that, I could do it. I'd feel good. I was like at the top of the world. I felt confident, I felt nothing. I saw nothing bad in
Right.
it. Zero bad. I was like, why isn't everybody doing this? This is
Right.
great. And obviously with everything, every decision that we make, everything we do for a reason. I mean, that's just human, everybody does things for a reason, and drug and alcohol use is no different.
Right.
So when I was young, I was like, kind of awkward. I was shy. I was, I lacked a lot of confidence. And then I did meth, and it was like, this is the greatest thing in the world. This
Gave you
works.
a new personality that wasn't shy and lacking confidence, and
Yeah,
it feels good, right?
yeah,
Like, yeah,
absolutely. Felt fantastic.
yeah,
And so you don't know the end story though. That is, when you're
right.
younger, that's the sad part about it, is that we don't know what the end story is going to look like. We do know what it looks like for addiction, but as the person that's at that age doesn't really know what it's going to look like, because all of those benefits and everything that we're receiving from it go away. All this stuff disappears.
And the delusion that you're different. I could
Yeah,
never be that bad. I'm different. I'm too
absolutely.
smart.
I'm
Yeah,
invincible.
I'm
Yeah,
invincible. Yeah,
yeah. That's the sad part.
yeah.
That's the, so I was thinking about this. Do you know Jody Barber? Have you ever met Jody Barber?
No,
She's
but I'm
great.
not good with names.
Jody Barber, she's an amazing lady. Jody Barber, she did 2 documentaries, one called Overtaken, the other Overtaken 2. Her son died
Mm.
at 19 on their couch at home of an overdose. Um, is it Jared Barber? But so we were talking about this idea, like, how do you teach kids, right? How do you teach our youth um, about drugs? Like back, obviously when I was in school, it was, Nancy Reagan's just say no, motto. Police had come into the school and they try to scare you, into not doing drugs. And, and as we know, you can't scare people away from drugs,
No.
right? The just say no is crazy because
Mhm.
it fails to take into account the mind's desire to want to understand.
It fails to take into account environment. It fails to take into
Yeah,
account, I mean, so many different things. It
sure.
absolutely needs to be revamped.
Yeah. And I was thinking about, and this really goes back to like the name of my podcast, High Walk Clean, um, because you have to bring an interest, number one, for kids to learn, and then you've also got to take into consideration the fact that some of these kids probably have already done drugs,
Right.
right? And so if you take like my story of somebody that's done methamphetamine and they're going like, wow, this is the greatest thing in the world, there's nothing negative. How are you going to reach that person, right?
Mhm.
And so I thought about this, and I'll never get a school to allow me to do this. I know that this would be literally impossible to do, but to be able to go into the school and say, and to be with in front of the kids and say, look, check us out. I just want to let everybody know I love to get high, right? Because see, you got to, highness is not a property of drugs; it's a property of people. We don't get high on drugs; we get high on our own chemicals,
Mhm.
right? And so, by true definition, we're not, when we use the word highness, you're actually talking about what we already produce,
Right.
dopamine and stuff. And so, I'd love to be able to go in and say, hey, just want to let you guys all know I love to get high, and check it out. I still get high, right? But I don't do it on drugs, and like
I think that
just
would be amazing.
leading into that
Yeah.
idea would get everybody be interested.
And why do you think schools wouldn't allow? I understand, like, one, you and I both live in California, so
Yeah.
more likely to allow something like that than, let's say, a
True.
a Midwest state or something
True.
like that, right?
Yeah, like Kansas or something like that. Yeah.
Right. But with fentanyl nowadays, overdosing and killing so many kids,
Yes.
they obviously need to do something to change this, right?
Yes. They do.
And they want to get high. I'm sorry, kids want to get high.
Uh-huh.
They want to get high, but like you said, they can do it in different ways and not drugs. And maybe they don't know that.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's, I mean, people need to alter their perception a little bit of what, quote unquote, we're talking about with highness,
Anyhow.
because you're not going to get that immense, you know, it, I think it's a combination of, lack of kids working on their self-esteem,
Mhm.
right? Because I think self-esteem is a big part to this.
Pressure.
Yeah, I've thought about this too. It's like, in junior, like elementary school, junior high school, screw all the focus on history and math and science and all that kind of
I
stuff.
agree.
Let's
Yep.
work on self-esteem, self-respect,
Yep.
confidence, everything that is actually going to make you successful.
Exactly. All
know?
the tools you actually need in life. We're on
Yeah.
the same page here.
Yeah. And so that's why, I've always thought about that. It's like, how do you reach the kids? I mean, that's always the question, how do you reach the invincible, and how do you reach those that already know everything? That's the youth,
Right.
I know everything. There's nothing you can teach me anyways. And so that's the challenge that you face, and so you have to go in there with a way to manipulate their thinking a little bit,
Yeah.
and
You
I
have to
think
get
that
on the same playing field with them.
you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah. Because
I think
otherwise you're
that-
just some old dude talking.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
not calling you old, but you're old to them.
That's 100%.
I'm old to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But that's the thing. That's what I really think about. It's like, that's what we got to do, because we got to do something. These kids are dying left and right. I mean,
I know.
it's insane, and the reason, that, like, I've already gone, I haven't tried this in Orange County at all. I don't know what Orange County would do, but I'm living in LA County. And so I had already spoken to a couple of our local legislatures and stuff here, over in like Pomona and that kind of area, and didn't get a lot of interest, um, because there is fear, because even, yeah, we're in California, but you've still got a lot of parents here that don't want schools to teach about drugs. Their fear is like, if we teach about it, they're going to do it, right? Let's not teach about sex, because if we teach about sex, they're going to do it. Are you kidding me?
It's like they've never been a teenager.
Yeah. I mean, are you kidding me? It's not like,
Right.
it's actually those hormones
Yeah.
that are,
Yeah.
that are going to kick in.
Let's like use our brains, people. Like, yeah. Well, I feel like it's like ignorance is bliss in their world, and it's actually the opposite.
Yeah. It's
the
it's an enemy.
Yeah, it's absolutely an enemy with drugs and sex and just life. Like, let's be real.
Well, and here's what really upsets me is that, you've got, okay, so let's say you've got all these parents that are good parents and healthy parents, and let's say they do teach them, right? They teach their kids. Okay, that's good. And that's great, but what about all the parents out there that are molesting the kids of the ones
Exactly.
that should be teaching the kids,
Exactly.
or the parents that are handing the crack pipe to their kid,
Mhm.
I mean, and that's the thing that upsets me too. It's like, let's not be selfish here too, because we got to remember that we're dealing with a lot of people here. And, I think teaching like sex education in school is important, because maybe you get a kid that is being molested that comes forward,
Yep.
um,
I feel like there's also a stereotype on what type of people do drugs and what type of people do this, right? And I have a daughter who's in high school, and she went to her first high school party, and the parents at this mansion, it was like literally a mansion, were there serving alcohol to kids and smoking weed with kids. And these
Wow.
parents are like, quote unquote, good parents.
Yeah.
They're quote unquote successful people. And my daughter was like, I just cannot believe, like, first of all, she hadn't been to a party, so she was not aware of what, as much goes on there that she thought she knew. She had no idea. But that the fact that the parents were the ones who bought it, the parents were the ones there with them.
Yeah.
And that's obvious its own mental illness in itself, right? They're trying to be young and blah, blah, blah. But there's no class to addiction. There's no lifestyle to addiction. And that, to think that, is naive, but I still think that that's the way we're taught. It's only the poor people. It's only these people.
Oh yeah. I grew up in very nice, my dad made lots of money. I mean, we grew up well. We were not poor or anything of that nature.
Right.
So it had nothing to do with environment for me, my parents did not. My mom, I don't even think's ever smoked a cigarette. I mean, she did. My dad I've never seen him drunk or anything like that. He has smoked cigarettes. That was the only thing I ever really know my dad. But so I didn't grow up, I mean, and you're right on that. It's like there is no, it happens in every community, every, neighborhood, and it doesn't matter.
Well, and
Rich, poor.
it doesn't matter. And it reminds me of your book, The Pain, Failure, and Misery Are the Stepping Stones to Success. And here's why. I really feel like, especially nowadays, children are not allowed to make mistakes. Their parents put so much pressure on them. And so when they feel like they failed their parents or the society or their school or their friends or whatever, oftentimes that's when they turn to something to numb the pain.
Mhm.
And so without that education, like you said, pain, failure, misery, they're stepping stones. We have to fail to succeed. You don't know what success is without failing.
Absolutely.
You have to feel pain to feel pleasure. Otherwise, you don't know the opposite, right?
No, 100%. And that's the real, that's what because the most common thing I hear from people is like, what do you fear? Oh, I fear failure. Come on, you need to fail.
You need to
Because
fail.
how do you ever going to know, it's like, the whole story of, Edison, I failed 1,000 times before I figured out the way it worked,
Right.
sort of idea. And that's so true. I mean, and how are you ever really going to know pleasure unless you've known pain?
Right.
Right. And I believe that. I think some of us that have been dragged through the depths of hell, right, find in a lot of ways more enjoyment in life than those that haven't. We get an opportunity to work on things other people don't.
Right.
I mean, who sits and says, hey, I'm going to work on my self-esteem today?
What's funny is people like us, right? Like literally it is a daily thing to work on yourself, where I feel like so many people are working on how much money they have in the bank or which bag they're, using or whatever the case may be. And these are the people who are teaching our children. And that's why we're here. Right. But like you said, the problem is how do we get to them? Because I love helping other people. I'm sure that there's people our age and all different ages that need to hear this and need the support. And more importantly, in my opinion, is how do we get to the kids?
Mm-hmm.
And kids are teenagers, kids are kids, and, I don't know.
You have to be able to do it in a way, just like you had said too. You have to get down to them. You have to get to where they are. And you have to really, truly know how to build rapport.
Yeah.
Because without trust, there's no kid that's going to talk to you.
Right. Like if you go in there and you're like, I've never done drugs in my life and you shouldn't do them either, they're going to be like, okay, dude.
or the cop coming in.
Right.
I mean, how stupid is that?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like a kid's going to go up to a cop and say, hey, I just want to let you know I smoked crack last night,
I'm carrying some on me right now.
Right.
It was funny. So, at the elementary schools around here, they have the DARE, the Say No to Drugs Dare Day or whatever. And the cops will come in front of the school to take pictures with the kids. Well, my son is young enough to where that's cool for him. Right. Mm-hmm. But then you get like the older kids and the parents are finding, they're like, I don't want a picture with a cop. Like, so they're not going to relate. They're just not going to relate, nothing wrong with them, but they just, like you said, they can't relate. What do you think the barriers to seeking help and overcoming addictions are?
Well, part of it, I think, is fear of other people knowing.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part to
The
it.
shame, the shame of it.
Yeah, I mean, depending on their families too, I mean, some families are very shame-based type families,
Mhm.
that are, again, outwardly have to have this perfect image of, this wonderful family, and then, oh my God, if you've got a drug user in it, that's a horrible family now.
Mhm.
You've got that stigma, right?
Right.
I think that's a part to it. Um, you know, I mean, in some cases financially, obviously, people have insurance today is just horrible.
Right.
It, you know, they want to pay as little as possible to get people, the help that they need. Some people really need a lot of help.
Mhm.
Um, the other side to this, and this is where our damn governor really pissed me off, Newsom, is the safe injection site that they
Tell
had.
me about this. Like why
So
I don't know a lot about it. So just tell me one, what it is and our listeners what it is, and then why it pisses you off.
yeah, so safe injection site is something that they first did a lot of studies in Canada on this. So they opened up. So what it is basically a place that is they open up. It's a place for drug users to go, a safe place they can go in. They can inject their drugs. So if they're IV users, they can get clean needles. Um, they can actually do it there. The places do not provide the drugs; they have to bring their own drugs. Um, and then you've got obviously nurses and doctors. So if somebody goes into overdose, we can, we've got Narcan and things like that to help them, survive. Um, and but here's the beautiful part behind it is that, just like I was saying, there's, a lot of us that are out there using hate it.
Mhm.
It's not, people think, like, so many people think that, oh, these drug users are out there and they're just love doing what they're doing and
Right.
that kind of stuff. And that's such a bunch of crap.
Right. They're miserable. That's why they're using the drugs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you hit that tissue dependency, that point to where it's like your body doesn't work without it, it's not fun anymore. There's
Right.
nothing fun about it. And so, and it just kind of goes to that ambivalence. Like everything about us goes like, you know what, I want to stop, but I want to keep doing it. Wait a minute, I want to stop. No, but I'm gonna keep, you know, and so what place in Canada found and was that you have counselors there, you've got resources available. And so when the person comes in and says, you know what, I'm tired of this, I don't want to do this anymore, you go, awesome, I got a place for you to go, let's do it, right?
Yeah.
Because think about this, you got about 5 minutes from when somebody says, I want help, to when
Right.
they're actually going to do it.
Yeah.
The time that you actually, the time, and this is the irony, the time that people will get help is when they're high,
Mm.
right? When you're
Because they're
high,
clear in how
yeah,
much it's hurting them.
well, and you're feeling great, you're
Right.
going like, dude, oh yeah, no, let's do this. I want to get clean. I feel, what I mean, kind of thing.
Right.
And that come down is not the time.
Right.
When people are, when you're going through detox and you're going through that kind of stuff, that's not the time when people do it. So if you have them come to a place getting high right in front of you,
Mhm.
right? And now Newsom, so they passed this up in Sacramento. They approved these test areas, one in San Francisco and one in Los Angeles. Um, and then Governor Newsom shot it down, right?
Oh.
And here was his reasoning was that we don't know the unintended consequences, right? So unintended consequences, but here's what we do know. We do know the consequences, right?
Right. I was gonna say
We know
yeah,
about
we know the bad. Yeah.
10,000 overdoses that were, last year here in California, right? That's the consequences. And so unintended consequences, I don't get it, right? And so, you know, these, so I think New York has a couple of them. I think they're the first ones in the United States. They are technically illegal.
Mhm.
Okay. So it's kind of like the idea of, like, how all the states are passed, legalize marijuana. It's
Right.
technically federally still illegal, and it still is. um, and so if you open a place like this, obviously that's federally illegal too, but who cares, you know?
Right.
Well, whatever. And so yeah, he shot this down, you know, and to me, it's absolutely crazy because because you go to the question of like, okay, so sure, we've got the youth that how do we help them? Okay. But then you've also got, so how do we help the people that are holed up living underneath the freaking, the freeway underpass, in a tent? How do we help those people? Right.
Well, here's the thing. Most people don't care about those people.
They don't exactly.
Yeah.
But
They're
some
not
people,
voting. They're
but
not paying taxes. So they don't
yeah,
care.
but it's somebody's son.
I know I care,
Somebody's
but I'm
daughter.
just saying
So
most people.
no,
Yeah.
I know, but that's the thing that people don't really, that's where people really lose focus, because
Yep.
there are people that do, and it is the parents of those people, and it
Mhm.
is the
Yeah.
ones that have no idea, but you're right, as far as the big picture behind it.
Mhm.
But also, if you look at how much money how much money does it cost us, for all the stuff that goes
Right.
on out there? So if you want to look at it from a financial standpoint too,
Right.
the people that don't care but just care about the money, you get these people back on track and they get jobs and then they start paying taxes and they, start thinking that's going to be a financial success, right?
Right. But there's the fear. I would imagine that one, there's the ignorance,
Yeah.
right? And two, I would imagine, I think that there's a fear that, okay, this is what I would say in a governmental position, that there's a fear that if we allow people to do drugs in this area, that we're encouraging the drug use. Now, I disagree with this, but I would imagine that this is where the shot down came from, right?
It's one of the
People saying,
arguments.
yeah, that
Yeah.
we're encouraging the drug use
Yeah.
because the ignorance is that they're encouraging it. These people are going to do it either way. You're not
That's it.
encouraging anything. You're
Correct.
just encouraging a safe place,
And a clean needle.
a clean needle, and alternatives to get help.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's where people get stuck. I mean, that's the stuff that kills me. It's like, that, you know, it- the solution behind this whole deal, legalize drugs, all drugs, right? Because this goes back to that same, what you just said, okay, is that, prohibition, which is what our government's always been about, right?
Mhm.
Is about stopping supply, reduce supply, reduce supply, reduce. There's no reduction of supply.
Yeah.
Right. There's plenty of stuff out here. And the problem is that, with, it's illegal. We say it's illegal, right? People are still doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, we got to get rid of this cartel. They're the ones that are killing everybody.
Yeah.
All this stuff coming up from Mexico. If you legalize it, there's no more money in it.
Well, there's money for the government. Here's my
No, there's
concern
money
as a
for the
parent.
government, but as
Yeah.
far as like the cartels and stuff,
Right.
you know,
This is my concern, like as a parent, when I hear that, and this
Yeah.
is coming from somebody who feels like I have a grip on understanding it.
Yeah.
It scares me as a parent that my kid could go in and get meth. One, because although alcohol is addictive, it's not as quickly addictive as something like Coke, meth. And it's not that they can't get it on the street,
Right.
but it scares me that it would be that they literally could go into, a store and get it. I mean, that would,
Yeah. The problem is is that, you can, it, it's not difficult to find.
right.
Right. I haven't done it in years, and I could go out there and I could find it and pretty quickly, um, a lot of people think that, if we legalize it, it's going to increase drug use, right? There's been other countries again that have legalized drugs, right? And they actually found that, sure, slightly in the very beginning, a little bit of increase in use, but in the big picture, no. Because here's my thing behind it is that, the people that do not do drugs, why do they not do it?
I would say so I don't do drugs, like, right, like I've never done Coke or anything like that. I am scared to death that I'm going to die, to be quite honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You didn't do it because it's illegal.
No, I would say it does hinder it though, right? Because I also don't want to go to jail.
Your bigger picture though has
I don't
nothing
want
to
to
do
die.
with
Yeah.
that, you know? And so, and your reasoning right there is really the reality, you know, is that the majority of people out there that do not do drugs, they don't do it because it's illegal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't do it because it's going to destroy their life. They
Right.
don't do it because they want to be successful. They don't do it, you know, none of that's going to go away.
But I feel like that takes reasoning that kids don't have yet.
Right. But when a kid comes up and says, "Hey, try this. Check this out. I got some good shit here." You know.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
then they do it and it's got fentanyl in it, you
Yeah.
know, and then they never
It's
come
like this
back.
catch 22, right? Because it's like, I think that both sides kind of have a point. I think you know more in that aspect because you've done it, right? And then but there is this, I mean, I'm going to tell you just as a kid in high school, and I know that it's available, but
Yeah.
I think it being illegal somewhat does keep her out of it because, you know, she would get her ass in trouble. Let's be quite honest, you know?
Yeah.
So I do worry that they don't have yet the capacity because they're drinking like all day long
Right.
because alcohol is easy to get, right? So they're
Right.
just always like, you know, drinking
Right.
because it's there and it's available and it's easy to get. And I know that they're doing drugs, but I don't think that nearly as many people are doing drugs as who are drinking
Right.
because drinking is legal.
And it's socially acceptable.
It's socially
You
acceptable.
know, even if you legalize drugs, I doubt it'd be socially acceptable.
I hope not. Jeez
I
Louise.
mean, think
Yeah.
about marijuana. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's like, I mean, you know, you're not walking around, everybody's smoking weed, and you know what I mean? Like you go into, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, you know, I mean, it's illegal. You know, you don't go to Denny's and freaking everybody's smoking weed, and you know what I mean?
Right.
Or going to bars, and you know what I mean?
Right.
It's
Right.
so it's like alcohol is a different animal, though, you know.
Yeah.
And actually, alcohol kills more people every year than all illicit drugs combined.
Right. But the question is, does it kill more people because it's more accessible? Or is it because of the type that it's socially acceptable, one, and the type of addiction that comes with it?
Yeah, I think it has more to do with it being socially acceptable because if you study again history behind drugs, you know, prior to um 1904, 1906 or whatever with the Food and Drug Act, you know, but prior, you know, to that time, or even up until, you know, alcohol prohibition, you know, 1920 or whatever, but 1914 was when they passed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, which was where, you know, the first criminal prohibition in the United States. That had to do with opioids and the coca plant and any derivatives of that, right? Those were the only two substances. But at that time, right, you know, majority of people in this country didn't do that. They didn't do those drugs. They
Right.
drank,
Right.
right? And it was legal. I mean, you could get heroin, you can get, you know, you could buy heroin in the Sears but Roebuck's catalog.
Wow.
You know, if you ever see those old, it's really interesting. I teach at a school for those working to become substance abuse counselors, and we use a book called Uppers, Downers, and All Arounders. And inside the book, it's got a lot of really cool pictures. But one of them, it's got an old picture of a Sears Roebuck's catalog, and it's got a thing of heroin, and you get a big old syringe.
Wow. This is crazy. I've never known this. Like, this
Yeah,
is interesting.
because it was all legal back then. You know, it was back when, you know, they had cocaine in Coca-Cola. You know, not a lot.
I remember hearing about that. I'm
Yeah.
not that I wasn't around then, but I
Yeah,
remember
no,
hearing about
I
that.
wasn't either. It was,
Yeah.
but
Those were
yeah,
the happy days.
yeah, but it was, you know, the reason, you know, and this again goes back to, but the reason why we basically have most of our drug laws is racial reasons, you know,
Mm,
that were, you know, to the opium, you know, the opium dens, the Chinese, you know, had huge opium dens and stuff. And so there was a lot of things there. The big theory of the cocaine was the black people. And and it was very explicit, the racism behind it, because they even had huge articles and papers, about specifically the reasons,
Honey, we never really know the deep down reasons, right? We think, oh, it's because they're trying to look out for our best interest and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Yeah.
The history behind, I've done a couple shows on it too, but the history behind our drug laws are horrible. I mean, and again, the reasoning behind it has nothing. If it had anything to do with our health, okay, what drug kills more people every year than every other drug?
Tell me.
Cigarettes.
Oh, yeah. And they let us have those.
Legal, right?
Yeah.
And then the second, alcohol.
Yeah.
Legal.
See, this is what should be taught in school. So the history, like you're talking about right now, where they're showing the Sears catalogs and they're talking about, the history behind our drug laws, this should be taught in school. Who cares about Christopher Columbus? Like at this point, I'm sorry, not to be a jerk, but we're good. Half the stuff they teach is not even real. As an instructor right? It's just bullshit. It's like the same bullshit they've been teaching, and we know it's not real, but let's just keep teaching it because we have books about it.
Yeah.
As an instructor at a college for aspiring counselors, what key principles or lessons do you emphasize in your teachings? I wrote this question down because I wanted to know. And how does your personal experience influence your approach to the education? So what lessons do you emphasize in your teachings? And then how does your personal experience influence your approach?
I teach it at a school that it provides all the education specifically for counselors. So we go through a lot of different specific, but there's one of the mods that I teach is self-growth, which I think is important. Again, going back to, with our kids, everybody, and especially for people that work in this field, it is one of the number one burnout fields in the nation. More people burn out in this field, and of course, as a lot of us are recovering, we end up relapsing. And so that part to me is huge, is the self-growth, that we continue to work on ourselves, self-esteem stuff, continuing to evaluate how we're doing. Like our job as a counselor, our number one job is to look out for the best interest of our clients, right? You're a mother, okay? So when you could say your main job is to watch out for the best interest of your kids,
right?
How do you do that? Well, you need to flip it around. You need to make sure that you watch out for yourself, take care of yourself more than anything, and then you'll be able to do your actual job.
Right, because they mimic what they see, right? Yeah.
And so that's kind of the part of that one, physiological
You can't
effects.
help others until you help yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that I was talking about, I love teaching the theoretical approaches. So we get into psychology, and, I love, teaching about a lot of the theorists and stuff. I love teaching what we were just talking about with the history of our drug laws, because I do get into that. Physiological effects, of drugs and alcohol, how they work. I love teaching that stuff. That was something that always really fascinated me, was how do they work? How does this stuff work in our brains? And
right.
And I love that stuff. And then figuring out how I can do it clean.
Yeah.
Right?
How to get there clean. Yeah.
So if you ever want to get if you want to and again, it's all about neurotransmitters, right?
Right.
So if you want to do a natural heroin rush, right? Natural heroin high, exercise is what'll do it.
Okay. So this is what should be taught at schools right now.
Yeah.
This is, you said they would never let you in when you say, I want to get high, but I don't do it with drugs. Okay. So heroin, exercise. Heroin
is exercise, because when we exercise, right, we have our endorphins, our body's own natural painkiller. So when you're, lifting weights or you're running or stuff, you're creating a lot of pain for yourself, right? If you haven't done it in a long time and then you decide to go exercise,
really
bad. The real pain, right? And so, but you get this, release of endorphins that starts, slowing down that message of pain, that go to get to your brain. And so, and the natural process from there is that you get the release of endorphins, and then you get a release of dopamine, right? The dopamine's the pleasure neurotransmitter. So it's a survival thing too, and that's the reality behind it. It's not our, they weren't necessarily created like that for us to go to a gym and to work out
Right.
kind of thing. If you look at sort of evolution and how our, bodies work, if you were, um, in war or something and you get shot, right? You're, you get this huge release of endorphins, numbs you up enough to and then you get that that kick of endorphins that gives you that, oh, okay, now I can go kind of thing,
Mhm.
and allows you to get away, and then the endorphins go away, and then you really get to feel it later. If you ever stepped on a nail, you kind of
Yes.
really get that
Or
sense
a
that,
Lego. Let me tell you, I have a little one and the Legos are horrible.
yeah,
Just
yeah, you
kidding.
step on it and then it hurts, but it's not too bad, right? When you
Right.
first do it. I literally
And then
stepped
later, yeah.
I stepped on a nail when I was in Maryland. I worked for a paint company. It went through my foot. and
Ooh,
so and so and it hurt, but you think like it would have hurt. It should have hurt worse than it did,
right,
right? You think, it's like people that, are sawing, they cut a hand off. They don't even feel it, you know, until they realize and look at it.
right.
Um, and so, but the next day,
It's horrible.
yeah, you can't even walk on it, can't even step on it. So, but anyway, so that's that natural thing, is that, um, and so all what heroin does is well, it's basically morphine with kind of a vinaigrette added to it, but it it gets into your brain quicker than morphine. That's kind of why it's more addictive. But you do, it basically just mimics your endorphins. That's what morphine does. Um, all your opioids is they mimic your own body's own natural painkiller. So they take the place up. And so our autoreceptors and our neurons basically say, hey, you know what? We've got plenty of them, so we don't need to make them anymore. And so when people are abusing it, they're putting in those. So they get so it's taking the place of the natural process is you get a release of dopamine, and that's where the addiction part comes in. It's a natural high, right?
Well,
Natural heroin high.
not to interrupt you.
That's what they call the runner's high.
Right. So not to interrupt you, but that actually reminded me about what we were talking about legalizing drugs, because technically they are legal when you have prescriptions like morphine and opioids and all of those different things.
True. They
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it just kind of like, as a mother now, I was talking about my fear and stuff. And then I go
Yeah.
back to the idea that actually they could get it anyways.
Yeah, the only, when you look at the schedules on our drugs, right? So there's 5 schedules, and when Nixon passed the Dangerous Substance Abuse Act, right? That's when they put schedules in. So Schedule 1 are drugs that are highly addictive and there's no medicinal purposes for it, right? So
Okay.
those are the ones that are completely banned. Marijuana is a Schedule 1 still, right? So that's why you legally can't have it. Heroin is a Schedule 1,
Mhm.
and all hallucinogens, LSD, all the hallucinogens are Schedule 1s. Now, Schedule 2s are highly addictive, but there are medicinal purposes for it.
Mhm.
Cocaine is a Schedule 2, right? You can get cocaine prescription. It's a spray. It's not you wouldn't be able to snort it,
I didn't
Methamphetamine,
know that, and I don't think I want to know that.
methamphetamine. Methamphetamine
Yeah.
is a Schedule 2. And it's there's actually a prescription called Desoxyn
Mhm.
that's prescription methamphetamine.
Hmm.
And so then you go, down the list, and as they go, 3 is less addictive than 2, 4 is less addictive, and so stuff like that. So, um, but yeah, so, there's these drugs are legal, Now, if you want to get a natural, if you look at the neurotransmitter methamphetamine high,
Mhm.
right?
And
You-
methamphetamine's like speed.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So methamphetamine affects 4 neurotransmitters, right? And this is really the horrible thing. So this is what this again is, if I go back to when I was a kid and said, I can't understand why everybody's not doing this. This is
Mhm.
great. This is wonderful. I feel fantastic. Okay. So the thing that you fail to understand is that when you continue doing a substance, right, you're going to basically, a lot of times wear it out. Okay.
Mhm.
And you're going to start killing the neurons, right? So now you're actually going to be creating an environment to where when you do stop at some point down the road, you're going to have a really hard time finding enjoyment in anything. Now, Methamphetamine is one of the worst in the aspect that it affects all of your feel-good neurotransmitters,
Mhm.
right? So it affects your dopamine, which is your pleasure, serotonin, which is your emotional stability. So people that are depressed, right, clinically depressed, they give them, SSRIs or
Right.
SNRIs, which are,
I wanted to go there. Yes.
yeah, serotonin,
Mhm.
reuptake inhibitors and stuff. So you get and then epinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter, but as a hormone, we call it adrenaline. And then norepinephrine, which is basically mental energy. So, kind of the theory on ADHD is they lack norepinephrine.
Mhm.
So they take an Adderall or an amphetamine, and it'll stimulate block the reuptake of norepinephrine, and so then they focus more. So anyways, it affects those four neurotransmitters, all your feel-good neurotransmitters. They're also all the neurotransmitters that are in the fight or flight.
Okay.
So when you're in danger, all of those kick in, right? You get the epinephrine to give you the physical energy, the norepinephrine to give you're kind of a little more in tune, right? You get that release of dopamine, to give you that little boost, serotonin also. And so methamphetamine blocks the reuptake of dopamine. It shuts down the protective mechanism that keeps your brain from having too much dopamine.
Mhm.
Because we have a very severe psychiatric disorder that is too much dopamine in the mid part of the brain, which is where the pleasure is, and it's called schizophrenia.
Mhm.
Right? Schizophrenia is too much dopamine in the mid part of the brain. So, you know, symptoms are auditory visual hallucinations, paranoia and stuff. Okay. And that's exactly what happens when we say meth-induced psychosis, right? So you got meth-induced psychosis, cocaine-induced psychosis, paranoia, people are taping up their windows and, cops are everywhere,
Right.
the whole paranoia. So they're basically creating the same environment, that is schizophrenia. Um, and so and then it blocks the reuptake of epinephrine, gives you the physical energy, blocks reuptake of norepinephrine, gives you mental energy, and so that whole process. Now, when you continually do meth, as I did, lots of it, you start destroying the dendrites on the neurons. When you destroy dendrites, you destroy neurons. When you destroy neurons, they're dead. Okay.
There's no
And
getting
so
them back.
there's no getting them back, right?
Okay.
Now, there is hope though, but the important part for people to realize is that when you destroy these, right, and again, they do never come back, right, you are lessening your brain's ability to get back to functioning the way that it's supposed to.
Hmm.
Okay, so people argue, is addiction really a disease? Right, that's always the big debate. Is
Right.
addiction a disease? 12-step program says yes, smart recovery says no. So depending on who you talk to. um, but either way, whether you want to say it's a disease or not, the one thing we do know is your brain changes,
Right.
right? So, when you're the opioid addict is the great example of this. So you got somebody that does heroin or even fentanyl. We got people that fentanyl is their drug of choice today, and so they're doing it, they're repeatedly doing it. And remember, it's mimicking your endorphins. So your body is no longer producing them,
Because it doesn't think it needs it.
doesn't need it.
Mhm.
So what happens when you stop? Okay. And this is where the heroin user gets to truly understand how important our body's own natural painkillers are. Because when they stop, they get to
Horrible.
feel
Yeah.
you get to feel what your body feels like without it. Right. And so nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, they
Yeah.
shit themselves, they, everything the opposite of what being on heroin is like, And so and that's basically what happens. So alcohol, for instance, the um, alcohol withdrawal and sedative hypnotics are the only two classifications that withdrawal can kill you. A lot of people think heroin withdrawal will kill you. It doesn't. Makes you want to die, but it won't.
Yeah.
Um, so alcohol and benzos and barbiturates, because they affect the same neurotransmitters. That's the only really two classifications of drugs that withdraw can kill you again.
So
They're
why do
legal.
those ones kill you? Tell me about it.
So they affect the neurotransmitter GABA.
Okay.
GABA is our most abundant inhibitory neurotransmitter. So GABA basically keeps our brain in check from overfiring. So when you drink alcohol, it basically becomes a part of that system. So when you're a real alcoholic, right, and you drink and drink and drink, and then your body becomes dependent, like that tissue dependency on it, and you stop the alcohol, you've now screwed up the GABA system, right? Because the GABA is now only working when you put the alcohol in your body, right? So it'll stimulate the release of the GABA, that'll come out, it'll calms you down because it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and so then you take that alcohol away, and you create basically a firestorm in your brain. So that's why when people go to detox, they put them on a benzo. They'll put people on Valium, Xanax, or something in that category, because it's basically they affect the same neurotransmitters. There's a thing called cross dependency, right? So when you're drinking alcohol, you're developing a tolerance to alcohol. You're developing a tolerance to Xanax. You're developing a tolerance to benzodiazepines, even though you may not be taking them, but you're
Just because you're drinking alcohol.
Yes, because you're affecting the same thing. So people that are heroin addicts are also developing a tolerance to fentanyl, are developing a tolerance to Vicodin, are developing a tolerance to morphine. They're developing a tolerance to anything within that category that does the same thing. And that's what cross dependency or cross tolerance is.
Let me ask you a couple different questions, because all of this is going into my mind. So I want to go back to a lot. Now I got to figure out which one I want to go with first. Let's go back to the kids, because for some reason this is important for me when I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
We just got to teach them this. Like, can you imagine like this knowledge? Like, I
think it's horrible. We don't live too far from each other.
Right.
So you need to go talk to the school that your daughter's at.
Yeah.
Let's test it there.
I want to, I'm telling you.
I'll come out there and we can, because the truth is that I think if we can show, because the thing about it is that there's okay, I get like the way that I want to do it. I understand
yeah, maybe your approach needs to change.
No, but I don't think I think it's the only way to be effective, right?
I agree with you. I'm just playing.
Yeah, no, but I agree though. That is the problem.
Maybe you don't tell them that's your approach until you do it, and then they see that it works.
Yeah.
We got to trick them.
Yeah, I mean, it's but the problem is this, and this is where everything's come down to this nowadays, right? Everybody's like, we need to get parents to sign off on this, parents' approval, I mean, that's to me, like, it wasn't like that when I was a kid, the parents, if the teacher said, we're going to do this, we just had to do it.
Right.
They didn't care what the parents said.
Right.
Somehow there's so much now,
Here's what I suggest, and we can talk about this another time, but I suggest that we put together a program that we can see if we can get it either done at the school and after hours or something like that, or maybe we can get signatures, but maybe it's not done during school hours and people can opt into it. And then once it develops a reputation, then we'll get more people, right? You have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so maybe you don't start hard.
And I think you would, because I think, if you made this like fun, if you made this, because it's not, you gotta, again, considering the fact that we're dealing with youth minds, they love fun, right?
Yeah.
They love fun. And so if you make something fun, entertaining,
and impactful.
Oh no, 100%. I mean, and
it has to be personalized.
It has to, yeah. So that's the thing, is that, you teach in a way that really grabs people. it's got to really grab people, you know. The greatest way I get high today is laughing,
Yeah.
right?
And we forget about that. Dancing, laughing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny with I did a whole show on this one too, and it was called Let's Get High, right? It was one of
Mhm.
my early shows that I did. Called Let's Get High. And and so I talk about one of the things I say, I got some shirts for my High Walk Clean, and one of the shirts that I had made was I said High Walk Clean, it's free, it's legal, and there's no side effects, right?
Mhm. Caution, you may be happy.
Right. But here's the funny part though, is that I actually did have when we say like no side effects, I did have a side effect one time on getting high while clean, and it was when I went bungee jumping, right? And I was young, but it reminded me a little bit of meth in a sense of coming off of it. But we jumped off a 300-foot bridge. It was up in like Shasta Mountains up in Northern California. I was living up in Chico, and so it was a 300-foot bridge, and it was the most intense adrenaline like thing I've ever done in my entire life, right? Never had an adrenaline high like that ever, you know. um and I remember them pulling, they drop the thing down and they pull you up. um and I remember getting over the bridge and I sat down and I just passed out,
Yeah.
just literally passed out.
Huh.
I had no adrenaline, you know but
Yeah.
that's like the only story I can think of where there was a side effect in a sense, but it was a healthy one.
Yeah.
And but then I said, all right, now everybody, I want to get high. Let's get high, right? And so I went through this absolutely insane laughing for nothing, and the thing behind it is that if you really study laughter and the benefits and how it works, it's the same concept, and it can actually, you almost get the same therapeutic benefits by forcing a laughter in a real intense, real way, as if it was also a real laughter.
Hmm.
And so, even if you're like kind of feeling down and you're not feeling it, you can literally just start laughing, and you can feel
It'll
high.
bring it back up. Hmm.
Yeah.
I love that.
I don't know if you ever studied. Um, you remember that movie Patch Adams?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and then have you ever heard of Norman Cousins?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Norman Cousins was the guy that considered himself to have laughed himself well. He
Mhm.
laughed himself out of a terminal illness, apparently, close to. But then, of course, you got Patch Adams, who's a real guy. I actually spoke to Patch Adams, a real guy.
That's cool.
Yeah, and he, he actually worked a little bit with Robin Williams when they did the movie. He's pissed though.
Why?
Because he was supposed to get money, right, to create, he had
The
working on
character. Yeah.
creating a hospital,
Yeah.
right, to do a lot of what he, because that was his whole thing, was like being a clown. And I mean, he's a doctor, but getting people laughter and things like that. But he never got a dime. And so because he worked with Robin Williams during the whole thing to get, for the movie, and he never got a dime. That is kind of screwed up, but
We can't solve that problem today.
we cannot. No.
Let me ask you a question on going back to depression and the stuff that they will put people on, whether it's Prozac, Paxil, whatever it is. We were talking about like the neurotransmitters and the neurons and all that stuff and how they don't come back. When you take those medications, now I'm not asking you to diagnose anything, this is just an opinion, right? But when you take those medications for like depression and anxiety, are those permanently damaging the neurons as well?
Well, not necessarily. So the problem, like the difference between, obviously like my meth use versus somebody taking, they're taking it as prescribed,
Right.
you're not really gonna, because that's why they, pharmacology, right? And the ones that make medications and stuff like that. And they come up with therapeutic doses, right?
Okay.
And so therapeutic doses are set to where you don't go over this amount,
Right.
right? So a doctor can prescribe between this and between this, Usually a doctor will work up to a certain level.
Right.
And that's part of the reason is because, there's a limit, on terms of what you can do. Um, Medications, and this is true, okay, is that there's no difference, okay, between taking prescription medication and taking an illicit drug, right?
Mhm.
In terms of what you're basically doing. So
Right, because
if
you're
I
talking about reuptake and all this stuff with
yeah,
the drug
so
is the same thing that the medications do.
same exact thing,
Right.
right? So, you know, uh, the drugs you take on the street, they're manipulating your neurotransmitters. They're either
Mhm.
stimulating the release of, they're blocking the reuptake of, they're doing something and that's exactly what pharmacology is when they make medications. Um, the difference being again is the amount that people take. So,
Mhm.
I mean, when I was doing over an 8 ball a day of methamphetamine, IV use, that would be way higher than any therapeutic dose that they would,
Yeah.
you know, and absolutely, I guarantee I was killing off plenty of neurons and stuff, by doing the amount that I was doing. I mean, it's lucky I didn't have an aneurysm,
Right.
but if I was able to do a little bit once a day, let's say even if I was snorting it, right, kind of
Right.
thing, just a little bit once a day, I'd be fine.
Right.
My body wouldn't really change that much. Um, but I don't have that ability. It's
Yeah.
also why I don't take Adderall. I do have, I know I have ADHD, and I have to be very careful on what I take.
Yeah. Because
Uh,
when you have an addictive personality, that's what it is.
yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you then about your thoughts on a lot of the people I've talked to recently are bringing, how do you say it? I can never say it. Psilocybe, whatever
So,
mushrooms are. Say that. Yeah.
psilocybin, yeah.
Yeah. I'll never learn that. But anyways, they talk about that now
Yeah,
becoming,
the microdosing.
yes. Can you tell me what you think about this? As somebody who's had an addiction, who knows the way the brain works, I'd love to hear your take on
Yeah.
this.
Honestly, I don't understand the word micro.
Right.
I don't even understand that word. No, I was kidding. You know, I personally am a huge fan of hallucinogenic drugs.
Yeah.
Right. Uh, Now, again, not something I do.
Mhm.
Um, I was for quite a few years when I was young, 17, 18, 19. I ran off with the Grateful Dead. I don't know if
Yeah, I know who they are. I'm not that young.
yeah. Okay. It's crazy because I'll bring them up sometimes like who,
Yeah.
they're less and less known today, but so I did that whole scene and I loved it. I did a lot of LSD, got heavily into that stuff. Now I did a lot more than micro.
Mhm.
So the idea behind it is that there is a lot of study and research into the therapeutic benefits of that substance. Um, the I don't know if I want to say it changes your brain, but that's one of the
That's what
theories
they're
that
basically saying,
people
right?
have,
Yeah.
is that it's changing your brain and it's making it healthier. Um, like MDMA, for instance, ecstasy, right, was used a lot before it became illegal, and therapists were using it with family therapy and
Yeah.
stuff, right? Um, and if you've ever done ecstasy, I don't know if you've ever done ecstasy, but there were you had MDA and then MDMA, right? And
What's the difference?
so MDA was more classified as the sex drug.
Mhm.
So that was the one that typically made you extremely horny and you just wanted to have sex with everybody. Um, MDMA was more of the love drug, right?
Where everything's
There,
beautiful and
you
blah,
just
blah,
want to
blah.
and touch
Yeah.
people like so,
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? Um, I preferred the MDA, but
That's a whole nother story.
but yeah, and then you end up with the person getting pregnant, and
Yeah, lots of stuff there.
that's how I ended up with the son on
We
these
should
things.
talk about that with the teens.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, um, I honestly have never really fully done an enormous amount of research on it per
Yeah.
se, obviously myself. I can I've heard a lot of great things about it. They do Mexico and Canada, right? They also have you heard of what is it called? I did a whole paper on this too years ago. The hallucinogen, and it's a pill, actually. It's in a pill form, and it's a very long lasting like very long lasting, right? Like 18 to 20 hours.
Wow. Yeah.
Hallucination, thing. And they're using it in detoxes. So Canada and Mexico, they use it in detoxes, and people are finding it to be helpful. I don't know if I would ever want to say it would cure an addiction,
Right.
but maybe it helps a little. I don't know. Look, my philosophy is this: if it helps and it works, do it.
Right.
That's always been my philosophy on this, because so many people get stuck on, well, you have to do what I did because this is what works for me.
Right.
That's crazy.
Well,
even
not everybody has an addiction problem.
Not everybody has an addiction. True.
Right.
But like, even with like the 12-step program,
Right.
like my philosophy on this is, let's find what works for you. I know people that are absolutely not going to do the 12-step program. So I'm not going to get stuck on saying you need to go do this. There is alternatives. You got smart recovery and, other variations. And the crazy part is that in New York, Faces and Voices of Recovery is an organization out there. They did a study and found that 40% of people in recovery, 40% have never gone to rehab nor a 12-step program.
Yeah.
And what's funny about that, though, is that I hear from people all the time that, yeah, if you don't do the 12-step program, you're screwed.
I
And
told you, like, I did AA for,
yeah,
a short period of time.
yeah,
And I didn't want to continue it because I felt like, I did my steps and all that stuff to, go through the process and all that, but I was really never committed to it. Like, I didn't do all the meetings that they want because I felt like people became addicted to the meetings. And I was like, all you're doing is replacing this with that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the negativity part is what I don't go to 12-step either, right?
Yeah.
I did. I was, I could say it was probably my foundation way back.
Right. It was a good start. Yeah.
A great start. And I also tell everybody, even if you do all the 12 steps, don't stop there. There's a lot of other things. 12 steps are only going to take you so far anyways.
Right.
But the negativity is what got me too.
Yes, everybody, all the time.
You'd get people like, if you're, I don't know if you cuss on here, but
oh yeah, for sure.
They're like, if you're a newcomer, shut your fucking mouth and open your fucking ears. You used to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
And that used to bother me because it's like, who are we here for? If
and you're not even supposed to be in charge. There's no charge. There's nobody in charge.
And if you got 30 years, you should be here for the newcomer.
Right.
And I used to hear that stuff all the time, and it used to really get to me.
Well, I saw a documentary on Bill W. And so
Oh,
for those who don't know, one of the founders of AA, right? And after he left the program, he actually went and did LSD testing.
I was actually going to say that.
Yeah. I find that so interesting because
he didn't leave the program though.
Right. But he wasn't participating in it because of the fact that he couldn't even be a member of it. Right. The whole reason why from this thing they said is that, at some point, because he was so idolized, he couldn't just go to a meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was, he did. And it was funny because his reasoning was that if, it might be a way for people to find a spiritual experience.
Yes.
Right?
But what he was doing was just looking for another high.
Yeah.
What do you think? You can have a spiritual experience and be high.
Yeah. I'll even tell clients this too. It's like, the one drug that I would absolutely still love to do today would be LSD. I would love it. I'd love to be able to, hey, this coming weekend, I'm just going to do LSD. But I don't. And a couple of reasons is I need the couple brain cells I got left.
I have a feeling you have more than a couple.
and the other reason is that I don't need it, right? And I also know myself, right?
Yeah.
Because I know myself in the sense that I would say, and again, you can't get addicted to LSD, and you can't because you're doing micrograms, you're doing tiny amounts, right? But I
You
also
cannot get addicted to LSD?
no,
That's
there's no,
interesting.
yeah, because you're doing such a small amount, it's literally in micrograms. If you did a lot, so there was, I don't know if you ever studied like ergot poisoning, and there was what's called ergotism. So
Mm-mm.
ergot is the fungus. So Albert Hoffman was the one who synthesized LSD back in the 30s, right? And he came across it on accident. So he was doing he was the ergot is a fungus that's found on rye, and so he was doing these studies to find, it was, I can't remember exactly what he was doing before, but anyways, he was doing some studies on something, and he accidentally ingested it, but he ingest just by it going through his skin, right? And
So he
so
touched it, basically.
yeah, and he all of it, started kind of having a little experience. It wasn't much, but it was, and so then he decided that, and it kind of, I think it sat on it for like 4 or 5 years or something. And then at one point in time, he decided that he was going to take it, right? And he was going to do it in, very small amount, what he considered, and he was going to do like 200 micrograms, right? It diluted in some water. And so he ended up doing it. And he was the classified, quote unquote, the first person to ever trip balls. So I would say tripping balls, right? um, and so he did, and he kind of wrote about this whole thing, and he actually wasn't able, he ended up, and it what's called bicycle day. There's a whole thing on this, right? And he ended up riding his bike home because he had this huge kaleidoscope colors and describes all this, experience that he had. But it was micrograms is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Now there was a history of what's called ergotism, which was ergot poisoning that was happening, where people were ingesting it. This was, the actual fungus, and like 20,000 to 30,000 to 50,000 to 80,000 people were dying of this, and there were actually two types of this, because you got to remember that hallucinations come from a fungus, right? So things that,
That's why it's like mushrooms and, oh, that's
yeah,
interesting. I didn't even
exactly,
think about that.
peyote, all that kind of stuff
Mhm.
is they're basically a fungus, that and they don't know the full reasoning behind why people get the hallucinations and things, but they do believe that. So like LSD, um, psilocybin, both affect serotonin. So we were talking about serotonin with emotional stability, right?
Mhm.
They actually affect serotonin, and so they think that possibly somehow they mimic or resemble our serotonin enough. They seat themselves in the receptor sites, but a little bit off, which possibly creates the hallucinations or something, of that nature. Um, s- the reason they don't know as much about it is because it's been illegal for so long, and so they
Right.
haven't been able to do studies, and so now, just now at this point in time, they're starting to be able to do more studies on this. um,
So why LSD over psilocybin?
I personally find the effects aren't that different per se. I think the psilocybin or the LSD is much more powerful. It can be, depending on how much you get in a dose, because that one's actually, you know, I always had a hard time eating mushrooms. It was just, like
Well, they
you
have them
just,
in candy bars now.
yeah, they said, but not back in the day,
Tea. Yeah.
back when I was doing it, you'd have to eat like an ounce of these
Yeah.
just nasty, trying to choke this stuff down, and you were doing it for a reason,
Right.
it's like obviously, but it was so much easier just, taking a couple of tabs of, 4 or 5 tabs of LSD and
Getting it from that. I
yeah.
have microdosed, and actually really loved the short period of time I did it. I didn't continue with it because one, I have an addictive personality,
Yeah.
and so can you get addicted to mushrooms? You can't get addicted to
Well,
LSD.
I mean, probably not. See, the reason, so the thing with LSD is there's such a huge, so we talk about tolerance, right?
Mhm.
One of the fastest tolerance that's developed is with LSD or some of these drugs. So it's why you cannot take LSD daily, right?
That's why you can't microdose on it.
Yeah, like you could take it daily, but it's not going to give you any of the effects you're looking for, right?
Okay.
You have to literally, that's why most people that would take it would do it like once a week. So you could do it on a Saturday, and the next time you'd want to do it, you'd wait till the next Saturday, because you need the tolerance to go away to get the effects. You ever studied you know all of the um, back in the 60s, of course, they were doing, you were talking about Bill W. and stuff, right? And the federal government was doing
Yeah.
LSD experiments.
Right.
They were also doing illegal stuff. They were uh, putting people that unwilling participants on LSD and
Right.
doing experiments.
In
It was
the
MK
mental
Ultra. It
hospitals.
was called
Yeah.
MK Ultra. Was
Yeah.
started with Operation Paperclip,
Mhm.
and then converted it into MK Ultra, which we were basically. And then that's when we obviously took a lot of Nazi scientists and hired them and pretended like they didn't do what they did, and we forgave them because they did
Yeah.
good stuff for
Because
us.
yeah, exactly. Because we said we can.
Right.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
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 Whole different subject.
Yeah. But yeah, so back then, you had some people that were obviously involved in that. My favorite band, again, the Grateful Dead. Um, the lyricist for Jerry Garcia, um, he got involved in the acid test, and he had Ken Kesey, who was the guy that wrote "One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest." He had what were known as Ken Kesey's acid tests that they did in San Francisco, where the Grateful Dead would play, the music during those, but those were just for, a bunch of the hippies up there just doing a bunch of acid and
Right.
um but they but yeah, that was a similar kind of thing. They could only do it like once a week, so really there's not a dependency that
Right.
develops with it.
Because you're not constantly flooding your body with it, so it then can't become dependent on it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
then
it's
you're not
just such
flooding
a
the
tiny
tissues.
amount,
Yeah.
if you did like anything close to the amount of like meth, like LSD that you did like with ergot, the fungus
You'd be
with
dead.
meth, you would be dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that
Uh,
defeats the purpose of it.
right. Yeah. Some of the, like the nightshade plants too, like there's, you really study with, especially when you're looking at the hallucinogenic type drugs, you get into the nightshade plants, which are also deadly. They're one of those things that, you know, um, the name of one of the plants, but people would take those and you could get hallucinations, but you could also die,
Yeah.
and so there's a fine line between the pleasurable experience versus the lethal dose.
Well, and
Uh,
that kind of goes to your idea of legalizing things, right?
well, yeah, I mean, people will learn,
Well, but yeah, but like legalizing it means that you can actually control more what's in it, the dose that's
Yes,
given.
correct.
Right. Whereas, like you said, you have a cartel who's putting whatever the hell they want to put in it.
Yeah.
And so
And
that's a
that
different story.
and that's the truth there, because the thing is that, yeah, you can, if we legalize it, then they, the FDA can obviously have a little bit more say in
Say.
things. So now
Mhm.
we're like regulating it a little bit more.
Mhm.
We've taken the huge value away from it,
Right.
because the more, you got Trump, that was like, we want to execute the people, right?
Right.
Okay, so now you're taking penalties and you're increasing the penalties. Well, when you increase the penalties, what happens? Value goes up,
Yeah.
right? So now it's even more expensive, and so it's more valuable. The think about the amount of money that the United States spends on this drug problem
Right.
and how much money we're giving the cartels.
Right.
They're the ones that are reaping the benefits.
Right.
And yeah, but I get it. It's such a touchy subject,
Right.
to explore that, because everybody always thinks yes, and then they think like my family, my kids will get,
Yeah.
so they look at it from that perspective. But the truth being is that, yeah, you don't want you don't want your kids getting it now, because they're gonna
You don't know
die,
what's in it. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. The
Uh,
fentanyl thing is a big, is it fentanyl? Yeah. Fentanyl is a big deal right now.
yeah,
So one, um, amazing conversation. I
this has
would
been great.
absolutely, I know, I love it. And I am serious when I talk about we should do something with the teenagers. And, if it's outside of school campus and it's in, got to get a space or something like that, and the parents have to sign a waiver, whatever, but you can't do anything unless you start.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it'd be a great idea, something small, even,
yeah, something small.
Um,
They're
and
going to hate me around town, but that's okay.
I look at it like, if we can do anything to save a
I
life.
agree. I agree.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not even, because I mean, that's the way we look at it within the field that I work in. It's like we have people that are going to die,
Mhm.
luckily it's been minimal. I'd say in the last 2 years, we've had two, that had gone through that are dead today, because they decided to relapse, which is not that bad. Because when we look at
Because
numbers,
so many more would have.
yeah,
Yeah.
you've got right now, it's like an average of, you know, 12 people are dying an hour in the United States of an overdose. That's like 12 every hour, basically.
Right.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And that's just the drugs. Now we're not even talking about the alcohol.
And that's the reportings, right? Because we all know if you're
That's what was
homeless, if you
reported.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. If you're lost in the
Yeah.
world, nobody reports you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so yeah, it's bad. I mean, something's gotta happen. I think, I got, like Narcan, for instance, every house needs to have these,
Mm,
because it's just everywhere. And it's not even,
yeah.
like it couldn't even, may not be even your house, but what if it's your neighbor or something,
Right.
I think people need to be taught. I got these things here too. Like I did a show on this one time, was these things are called rapid response. So, I thought about this before I even say this in my book. I go, it's sad, but maybe we need to go to the schools and we need to teach the kids how to test their dope,
Yeah.
because I'd rather see them, alive, right?
Right.
And so those rapid responses actually test your drugs for fentanyl. So, if you got heroin and you're doing heroin, it's like before you inject it, let's test it, make sure there's no fentanyl in it, um, but some's got to be done.
Well, and again, it goes back to that fear, right? Well, if I give my children this, are they more likely to do drugs because they can test it? And
Yeah.
when we started this conversation, when you said like drugs should be legalized, I immediately went, nope. But, we're like, what, over an hour and a half in, which I'll have to cut this down to two podcasts, which also
Sure.
part two, but I'm super excited to do that. But, through this conversation and the education that you gave me in our conversation, I feel like what's lacking is not that, we don't need to legalize drugs. What's lacking is the education behind it.
Mhm.
And with the education, probably it wouldn't even be as big of a deal because it would take away the fun, to be honest, because they like to do it because it's illegal too, right? It's a no.
Well, yeah. I mean, my legalizing it's ideal, right? It really would be. But the other side to it is this, and you say like the educational part, right?
Right.
Is that, if you get people, if you get the kids to learn to love themselves, care about themselves,
Yes.
respect themselves, it's not going to matter,
Right.
because, that's
That's the first step.
yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like bullying, for instance, it's like if you get a kid that really doesn't give a fuck what people think about him,
Right.
I mean, and that's what I
You
teach.
can't be bullied if you
know?
don't care.
Yeah, that's the thing that I like. I find, so much with substance abusers
Yeah.
is they care so much about what other people think,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I tell these clients that I work with, and it's one of the groups I do, and it literally I title it, "Let's stop giving a fuck what people think about us." That's the
Yeah.
title of my group,
Yeah.
because it's true. If you can stop caring, you'll be you'll behave different. You figure out who you are as a person. You love yourself, you care about, and then be you. And then who cares?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's all part of, yeah. And that again is all part of teaching them, showing them. And let's be honest, the parents aren't going to do it because most of the parents don't love themselves,
Absolutely.
you
And
know?
you're absolutely right, you know?
Yeah.
And so many parents are miserable, you
Oh
know?
yeah. And the kids see it.
Yeah. And how many parents are doing drugs?
Right. Well, and it goes back to, alcohol is a drug, and they do that too,
It
because
is.
it's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
Let's end this podcast, although I have a feeling you and I are going to be talking a lot more.
Yeah.
But let's end this podcast with you giving, give us a thought, something that we can sit with and kind of like, kind of just go through in our mind, something that provokes some thought from us.
Well,
No pressure.
yeah, no, I'll say there's a couple things that I think are very important for people to realize, right? And the first one is no matter where you've been or what you've done, you can do anything you want if you're willing to fight for it, right? And I think that's the first premise because and this was a big one for me because I used to work with a lot of people out of the criminal justice system. That was my story, getting arrested. I'm a 6-time convicted felon. And so, we get out and we say, oh my God, it's like, who's going to hire me?
Right.
What am I going to do? And people stay in prison up here, and if you stay in prison up here, you're going back to prison. That's the
Right.
sad part. And so no matter where you've been or what you've done, you can do anything you want if you're willing to fight for it. And I believe that, within reason, obviously. But and then the other one is that, people get sober because of what they don't want, but
Right.
people stay sober because of what they do want. Right.
Mhm.
And so, that's the other side. So we go back to the pain part, right? Pain, failure, and misery are the stepping stones to success. Now, the problem with pain, though, is pain eventually goes away,
Mhm.
right? Everybody eventually gets help because life sucks. I got
Right.
arrested, my spouse is leaving me, whatever, my parents are going to kick me out of the house. And so that's why I say, okay, you know what? I need to get help, right? And, people go into rehab because I don't want to be a shitty parent, right? I don't want, kind of stuff. They go in because of what they don't want. If you don't change that motivation, you're going to go back to using, right? Because eventually the legal system be off your back, spouse will trust you again, trust comes back, everything's good, everything's wonderful. I get the money, I got the job back, And so, and if I haven't changed it, then there's no reason for me to stay sober. Um, the other side to that is again, but people stay sober because of what they do want, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm no longer doing it because I don't want to be a shitty parent. I'm doing it because I want to be a good father. Think about the differences between those
Yeah.
statements.
Even the feeling when you say that
Yeah.
is different, like the physical feeling, right?
Yeah.
Shitty parent versus good father. Like
Yeah.
shitty parent, I feel sad and depressed, and good
Yeah.
father, I feel motivated.
Yeah. And the qualities behind that. Like you look, so now I get the opportunity to say, okay, what are the qualities in a good father? You know? And so that's the stuff that I get to work on, you know. I stay sober today because I want to be happy,
Mhm.
right? And that's another big part to it is like happiness. That's another thing that kids need to be taught because I put a whole thing together on this topic too is happiness, and it's funny because it goes into that whole principle of I started out by talking about 2 types of thinking. And the
Right.
first type is straight thinking and then stone thinking, right? And stone thinking, the irony is again, we're not talking about drugs, right? Is actually the thinking we want to have, right? Because stone thinking is I don't see black and white. I'm able to see the shades of gray. I'm looking
Right.
for similarities instead of differences. I'm more spiritual instead of materialistic.
Yeah.
So I'm looking within. And so like there's all these different qualities on it, and I always at the end of it, and I say, let's stay stoned, right? And
This is why the schools don't like you, my friend.
yeah. But it's the concepts of like, it's the wording and that's the thing though. It's like, you got to get people interested. People
Yeah.
need to be intrigued.
There's a
People,
shock value.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's none of it's like, and it's absolutely 100% designed to help people stay sober.
Right.
Because that's not where, because if you want to stay high the rest of your life, clean and sober is the only way you're going to do it.
Right. Because otherwise you're not high the rest of your life. You're going through ups and downs constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like adaptation. So in that lecture, I talk about happiness is that, a lot of people think money, right? Money is going to bring me happiness. Like I can buy money, right? But the truth being is that if you have the idea that I want to be happy or that money is going to bring me happiness, eventually you're going to be in fear.
Yeah.
Right. Fear
Because
of
if
losing
you don't
it.
have money. Yeah.
Because then I'm miserable if I don't
Mhm.
have it. Right.
Mhm.
And so now, and it's not saying that you can't have a lot of money and be happy, because you can, right?
Right.
It's also saying you can be poor and be happy too, right?
Right.
Because
The
it's
mindset.
not, has nothing to do with money, right? There is things that money does bring, like security, which is helpful.
Comfort. Yeah.
you know?
Nobody's going to say they don't want money. Like,
Right.
let's be honest. Right.
Yeah. But it brings fear,
Mhm.
and so, but one of the things that I talk about is that, one of the things is appreciation, right? Appreciation, the strongest outbound form of love, the idea of giving of everything and asking for nothing. They've done studies and found that your mind cannot be in the state of fear and appreciation at the same time, which
Wow.
means that appreciation might be the antidote to fear. So if I appreciate, I stop taking everything for granted,
Right.
because that's what people do. They just start, but when I appreciate stuff, I treat things differently too, and when I appreciate stuff, which is closely related to gratitude,
Right.
um, that when I focus on that gratitude and I'm grateful for what I have, I move away from all the woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? How many of that's do we have? Woulda,
Right.
coulda, shoulda. If I'd only done this, just done that, but you didn't.
Right.
So let's focus on what am I grateful for, And so that's the stuff, like happiness to me is, I find with people, it's like, if you can truly be happy and feel good in sobriety, it's going to be a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Life is eternal. Liberty is an inalienable right. But when it comes to happiness, good luck. I hope you
And you
find it.
can't buy it.
You can't buy it, right?
You can't buy it.
And so, and that's the thing is, it's like teaching people this, like, where do you find happiness?
You
And
have to find it within.
Yeah, it's not a relationship. Because that's the other thing. People are like, well, this person makes me so happy.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Nobody can make you happy.
Right.
You can be happy with somebody.
Right.
Right. But
But
nobody.
if you're unhappy and then you get a moment of happiness with them, you're going to convert back to being unhappy because that's where you were in that space. Right. So it kind of is like drugs.
Yeah,
So
sure.
you take a drug, you get high off of it, and then you go right back to, or maybe even lower than you were before you took the drug.
You'll be lower eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the problem with the pleasure thing, because that's the other side, is that people think pleasure will bring me happiness, right? And pleasure is a requirement to be happy. Otherwise, that's called anhedonia, like pleasure, like people that, you look up major depression in the DSM-5, you'll see one of the symptoms is a state of anhedonia, right? And that's inability to experience pleasure. Those are the ones that kill themselves, right? So you do need pleasure, but they're not the same things, right? And so there's a thing called adaptation level theory. So any time that I take something like a drug for an extended period of time, my body's going to adapt to where I will eventually no longer get pleasure from it, right? And that is the dangerous part about drugs. And that's what happens. That's why, for me, I mean, you think about this. I did so much methamphetamine, right, that I reached a place to where it did not matter how much I did. I wasn't getting pleasure from it.
Right.
All it was doing was keeping me awake enough or giving me enough energy to be able to do what I needed to do. That was it. Pleasure was gone. That sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had to do it over again, I'm sure people ask you this. I would imagine that they do. Given all the beautiful things that you have to offer now, would you have gone through it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would not do anything and I wouldn't do anything different.
No.
It's
because you have so much to give because of it.
Yeah. I have, and I say this too, like there's no action that I've ever done that makes me who I am. So I'm
Right.
not my actions, right?
Right.
But it has helped shape me in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I love who I am today, because
Yeah.
that's the point. Is like I can take all of my life experiences. I wouldn't be doing what I do today,
Right.
you know? And I love what I do today.
Yeah. You might be chasing a job for money because you
Sure.
think money will make you happy.
And what I do today does not make me wealthy, trust me.
Right. But you're living exactly what you're teaching, high while clean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get high every day. Just do it differently.
We're going to work on your approach.
Mm-mm.